experts out there believe that this is going to be Modi government's most important union budget. He will perhaps be getting into election mode next year, and which is why this budget itself will set the course for the economic reforms that Mr. Modi would want to undertake over the next 3 years. Joining me, some of the tallest captains of Indian industry right here at the CII on ET Now. And each one of you, thank you very much for being with us. I must first begin to talk to each one of you about the context of this budget. From the budget last year to the budget this year, the context has really changed. The narrative has changed, so to say. There was a lot of euphoria, unreal expectations almost, and now there are many headwinds that the ministries are dealing with, including the Finance Minister himself. Given the context of this budget, and Mr. Mazumdar, let me start with you. How is budget 2016, according to you, going to be different from the previous budgets?
You know, any budget is an important fiscal exercise. I wouldn't say one is more important than the other, but this is definitely, you know, the government has actually done a lot, but a lot of it has not been translated on the ground. The demand doesn't show up, the investment doesn't show up, and that is why people are looking forward that the budget is going to do something to give this the required impetus so that we start seeing the investments happening on the ground. There is a big concern that the investments are really happening by the public sector.
That's right.
So the private sector investments are not on the ground. There are two other reasons for it. You know, there's excess capacity built up and things. But demand is the primary concern. And so obviously they expect there'll be initiatives that's going to really give the demand a push.
Demand a push, Mr. Memani, if I may come to you. Just when I get down to talking about investments and demands and all of that, I first want to talk to you about the context of this budget. Are expectations more real this time around? Are people expecting that this is going to be a budget which will, have the economy move in progress? This is going to be incremental in nature, unlike the previous expectations that one budget is going to change the course of Indian economy.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the expectations are much more muted. I think people are wanting to see much greater execution on the ground. And they actually want to see that all the announcements that have been made. So I don't think there has been any shortage of ideas or any shortage of policy initiatives, any shortage of intent. I think any shortage in energy. I think the big thing that people really want to see is execution. So to the extent, and there are some softer spots in the economy. So to the extent that the government can address through the budget some of those softer spots. So if you look at, the macro environment, India's had a, relative to what's happening in the world, we are in a very good position. Given the oil prices, commodity prices, that's a positive. There are three big negatives. One is too bad agricultural, cycles at the same time. So that's leading to rural distress. The second is this entire issue of restructured, hangover of bad assets that are coming through. So how they deal with the bad assets, I think that's an equally important issue. And then this entire legislative logjam that has happened, and how they deal with this legislative logjam, and what are the alternative things that they can come through to ensure that the economic momentum continues.
Mr. Shriram, if I may come to you, what should the legs or the focus of budget 2016 be? What should the sustainable growth drivers be? Because many people believe growth is the answer to some of the points that Mr. Memani or Mr. Mazumdar have raised here. What should the growth drivers be? What should Finance Minister Jaitley be chasing in his budget?
I think there are 3-4 areas which needs to be focused very hard. I think it's already mentioned, infrastructure is something which has been talked about over and over again. That needs to be done. Only I'll add is that getting stuck to a 3.9% figure and saying that next year also we must come to 3.5 and not. I think this is the time when we should look at improving the investment in infrastructure and delivering rather than getting stuck to a figure. So that's one. Second, I think the agriculture sector of the country requires a very major push. Agriculture has actually lost out. As Rajiv rightly said, 2 monsoons have been bad. But on the policy side, there's tremendous need to actually get implementation on the ground, whether it's irrigation or roads or removal of the APMC Act, or whether it's the farmer producer organizations. How does the farmer actually feel that my economic activity is profitable activity?
That's right.
Until we get that, the Indian economy with our 60% population living in rural India, 110 million farming families, India will not get out of its problems. So I think agriculture, farming, rural India has to be given an aggressive push, more than the ordinary,
I think agri is a subject that I'll spend a little more time to talk about. But Mr. Chatterjee, if I may come to you, everybody talks about investment in infrastructure and how that is going to be almost the driver for every sort of growth that we want.
If you see budget after budget, the percentage of public outlay on public expenditure that comes from the budget falls every year. The real trick now, as we have seen, which the government has been clever enough to also understand and implement, is off-budget financing.
That's right.
The classic example in front of our eyes right now is the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. With a 20,000 crore investment from the budget, you leverage 4 lakh crores. So the trick now is whether you're escrowing toll revenues that Mr. Gadkari is thinking, whether you're raising what Mr. Suresh Prabhu is doing, whether you're raising from LIC or the World Bank. The whole trick on this budget that I would look forward to is, while you keep an eye on fiscal discipline, how can you creatively now run this engine for this country on using the budget to kickstart off-budget financing? And I'm going to stop after this point to say that you can't ignore PPP, because broadly
you can't keep functioning on one engine.
You cannot. This engine has to start revving up and delivering. So the Kelkar committee report has actually made some very hard recommendations, and many of them have very strong implications for political economy. So I am hoping that intelligent interpretation of Kelkar's recommendations will find a place in the budget, which will revive the confidence for both domestic and foreign investors in infrastructure. But let me stop here.
Mr. Banerjee, all of this is hinged upon the fact that consumption has to first be boosted. You can have great roads, you can have great airports, but if people are not going to consume the infrastructure that you build, what use is that infrastructure going to be put to? How should the government look at boosting consumption to begin with?
You really look at what the 2 bad monsoons and we are really dead. And last time in 2008, one of the rural sector played a big role in taking the economy off of the situation that it was in. But here we need to create that supply side into the rural sector. We need to really look into on irrigation. We really need to look at even how do we increase non-farm income in the rural sector, and that's going to be a very, very critical area, and we have never focused on it. And unless we are able to create that type of and third, of course, the more money in the hands of the people to spend, and I think that's going to be very, very critical, as you said, in the consumer demand front.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room, so to say. And Mr. Memani, if I may come to you on this. When crude was at 150, India spoke about whether you should be meeting your fiscal deficit, whether it's going to be possible or not. Crude is at levels of below 30. We are still talking about that old goddamn narrative. Should you breach the deficit? Should you bridge it? Does it amuse you at one level that, I mean, look at the bonanza that we've made and the narrative continues to be the same?
There are 2 camps on this. So I'm on the camp that I think India should steer on the fiscal discipline. They should go for 3.5%. There's no reason why we shouldn't be steering away. And I think, as any corporate will tell you and any person will tell you, that focusing on the numbers, on the targets, being disciplined on that is very, very important. So as you rightly said, India has commodity crude prices that are in its favor. Secondly, we are going through a very turbulent time globally. So I think it's good to have a tight, strong balance sheet, because you never know. If you have a strong balance sheet, you can deal with uncertainty. If you have a weak balance sheet, I think it's difficult to deal with uncertainty. Thirdly, whilst the central fiscal deficit is under control, the state fiscal deficits are getting less and less disciplined, and especially with this Uday scheme and everything, where they're transferring the liabilities from the state electricity boards to the state board, to the state government balance sheets. I think the fiscal deficit in the states are likely to go up. And fourth is, if you compare around the world, whilst India is in a very good position, but if you look just in terms of consolidated fiscal deficit, India is on the lowest quartile. So except Brazil, most other developed countries or emerging markets have better fiscal deficit percentages than India. So I think for India to slip down and steer away from the target, and also if you have to control the interest rates, if you have to give confidence to the international monitoring agencies, you have to get the credit rating going, the RBI to be comfortable, so that we reduce the interest rates. We reduce the interest rates, the biggest beneficiary of that is going to be government.
That's right.
We'll have lower fiscal deficit.
And the inflationary concerns.
Inflationary concerns will be lower. So I think all in all, I personally think the short-term incentive is there, that this will give rise to greater consumption, greater demand, which is a big concern for everyone in India today. But I think if you put everything everything in perspective, I think it's probably better to steer the line at 3.5%.
Mr. Sriram, you don't quite agree there?
No, I think really now is the time, because of the situation in India, because of the situation in the world economies. I mean, our exports and all have got hit also, because look at every country in the world except for the US. Everyone is under stress. What's happening in China is actually likely to aggravate even further, which is going to add more pressure on our
People
exports.
are raising questions even about the US economy and its pace of growth as well.
With all that happening. Then over here we have the 7th Pay Commission, we have OROP, we have a lot of other things which are coming about. I think in terms of the new insurance scheme for rural India, which the PM just announced, all that is going to require money. And I think it's a time when we are the bright spot on the world economy. I think we have to capitalize on this today. Fortunately, 85% of our economy is linked to domestic consumption. We have to increase consumption. And consumption can go up by spending more, giving more money in the hands of people, so that kickstarts the economy.
You know, that's one part of and one camp, and that's the other camp, and I'm glad two camps exist on my panel. But Mr. Mazumdar, which camp are you in? You know, many people believe, and economists particularly say, it's always easier to go for fiscal expansion, but if you set a limit, it lets you look for innovative means to either get there or innovative means of growth. Would you agree with me, and would you agree with Mr. Memani?
I'm going to go the mid path, not the yes camp and not the no camp.
You want to be diplomatic. Let's have you go
No, I'll
there.
tell you why.
Yes.
Because there are ways and means where you can keep the fiscal deficit to a certain limit. You know, off balance sheet, more of public sector surplus spending. So there are various means of doing it. But if you are so focused on controlling the fiscal deficit and you stop being innovative, then you're really going to hamper growth. So you've got to play both together. Little bit of little bit of innovative thinking on keeping the fiscal deficit, but at the same time not hampering the growth of the country.
It is not necessary to have a debate that increased public expenditure to stimulate the economy, which Ajay is saying rightfully, is not necessarily in dissonance with fiscal rectitude, because as Mr. Mazumdar is saying, as many of us are saying, you have two options before you. One is of course, this repeated point of off-budget financing. You're seeing large portions of infrastructure ministries doing things which they didn't do 3 years ago,
that's right.
which is everybody is raising funds for growth outside the budget. Second issue is that there is always, shall I say, a deficiency across all governments in meeting the disinvestment target. Disinvestment is linked to the market. Now I have a point for you and your viewers. You know, what about strategic sales of infrastructure assets? India,
I was going to come to that next.
I
but
mean,
I'm
there
glad
are
you're raising
power
that
plants,
issue.
roads, ports, airports, hydroelectric projects, hotels. The state owns a huge amount of assets which the PE funds coming from Canada, Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, they are keen to take not development risk, but they're keen to buy operating, running assets. Even Indian companies. Why don't we have a program which is far more powerful than disinvestment, which is linked to markets? This is not linked to markets.
And actually empirical evidence does seem to suggest that strategic sale always gives you better returns than disinvestment
Now, if you
does.
put off-budget financing and add that to strategic sale options, which is humongous, you really don't need to have this debate at all, and this is the third camp. You know, I was looking at data for the last 10 years. We've never met our we've never met our divestment target. Never, ever. It's been either 1/10, 1/5 is the best we've gotten to. Strategic sales is the way to go. Everybody would agree to that. Will the government have the political appetite to go for this? Is really the big question.
I think they will probably narrow it down to a few areas. I don't think they will be as wide as Vinayak is suggesting, but you could do minority strategic sales and get financial investors, some of which he mentioned, and there are some very good assets and they could find ways of monetizing. Also, you could have some public sector units who are doing very well, they coming and consolidating.
There's also a credibility issue to this.
That's
you made
right.
a promise and you've got to deliver.
Very frankly speaking, if we are treading on the path of a fiscal imbalance, I think we are treading on a path where we will get on to an inflationary situation, where we will again put a heavy sort of a situation on the RBI for the interest rates. You will not see the investments to the rate that one needs to that to come in. We will see a global pressure back onto India. One of the things that India has been credited with has been the fiscal management.
That's right.
And if we are unable to get onto that, and if we fail to bring back the investment, we will be under pressure. So we need to be extremely cautious, and there's a point that I said at the outset, that the finance minister would have to be extremely prudent in seeing that he is able to balance it and not perhaps get carried away to see that yes, for growth we can really compromise so much on fiscal discipline.
And it all boils down to living on a budget, so to say. You have a point.
I just want to make this point that the budget is not just a financial statement or an accounting statement. You know, it has very strong political overtones, and one of the things which I've been sharing with my colleagues here is that the smoke signals emanating not from the Vatican but from North Block is that there is, and some of the political leadership will tell you in private that they have a little bit of concern on a criticism mounting, that what is called the Chandrababu Naidu syndrome earlier, that there is too much urban centricity in the schemes that have been announced.
I was going to come to that.
High-speed trains, smart city, etc. Make in India.
Especially at a time when rural economies
has been under stress, and therefore you can bet your last rupee, at least I am betting, that this budget in its form, content and presentation will have a very strong rural slant. In the sector where I earn my living, I am reasonably clear that you're going to see a slant of expenditure towards rural roads, irrigation, rural water supply and rural electrification, so that there is a certain balancing and a positioning towards the rural communities.
Let's begin the third, the third big elephant in the room is of course banks. Should the government go ahead and continue with its present policy? Both the UP and the NDA have followed, keep recapitalizing banks. That's the only way you're going to turn them around. Or should they actually very seriously turn back and say, why are we putting good money after bad money? Why don't we reduce stakes?
You know, you reduce stakes it's not that simple when you have a stressed balance sheet.
That's right.
So obviously, you know, if anyone's going to come to the rescue, it's going to be the government. So it'll have to be the government. But instead of just coming to the rescue, I think they're just got to make sure that the banks become more efficient. You know, why did all this happen? Somebody somewhere down the line took wrong decisions, or the process was wrong, or the standard operating procedure was wrong, something was wrong. And they need to make the correction. They need to get to the root cause of the problem and make the correction. I don't think there's an easy, simple of privatizing, because, you know, private sector is going to look at the viability and the profitability. So you still have to go back to the state to rely on that. So I just feel that what is important is to, you know, really make the banks aware and get them to become more efficient than what they are.
So get them to become more efficient from what they are. But to get out of the crisis, Mr. Sriram, what would you want the government to do? I mean, one of the suggestions that's now coming into the public domain is that why should India doggedly follow the Basel norms? Why don't we take a leaf from the Basel norms, reduce our recapitalization requirement? Why should we have capital adequacy of 8%? Why could we not have it at 6%? Is that something that finds favor with you? Because the counter argument to that is that when and if the economy does recover, banks will be required to lend credit. Where are funds then going to be generated from?
I think changing the norms when you are in a stressed position is not a good idea.
Okay.
I think at the moment the objective must be to clean up the banks. It is at a cost. As Sumit rightly said, why has it happened? That also must be looked at. And those who are in the stressed position, where is it because, where it's happened because of actually economic parameters and where it is for other reasons. I think that needs to be identified. But getting them in order, writing off bad debts, loans, etc., and cleaning up the balance sheet is important, because then you at least know where you stand. Otherwise, like a dark pit without any knowledge of how deep that pit is. So I think that's one. Secondly, after that is done, the government should put in money to recapitalize, make them healthy again, and then look at strategic disinvestment.
Mr. Chatterjee, you have a...
Supriya, on this banks business, there's this great debate going on now between good bank, bad bank.
That's right.
Let me not step into that debate because everybody has a point of view, but let me suggest an idea which is also gaining traction, which is the NIIF, the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund, has to get operationalized.
That's right.
One of these step-down buckets is an asset reconstruction company, which can be funded to a fairly large extent, because there are international companies, PE funds, who are in the business of picking up stressed assets and making a money. So I would feel that this budget, I would hope, has a practical solution to attack the bank's problem by one of the key methods of cleaning them up is to actually take the bad assets and put them into not a bad bank but a asset reconstruction fund, which will enable a certain degree of cleanup of the bank's situation. So at one level, I am personally looking forward to this intervention at this budget, so it is a step, a practical step which can be implemented straight away. Other than that, what is the NIF going to do?
Let me ask the more uncomfortable question to you, Mr. Mazumdar, since you're the president of CII. It's only fair that you do that.
the head that wears the crown.
That's right. It's only fair that we put on the tough ones to you. And this is a tricky question there. There is just so much being written and said about the startup space, the entrepreneur instinct in India, the incentives that are coming their way. Do you believe in some sense that's taken focus away from the traditional industries that are actually the growth drivers, that are actually the big job creators, whether it's steel, whether it's auto, whether it's cement? The core infrastructure sector is a little fuddy-duddy, I agree, but has attention been taken away from them and is really with these cool guys, so to say?
These cool guys are doing a cool job. That's fine.
That's right.
But the traditional industry is going to be there. I wish you were in Bombay last week, and there was no lack of focus on manufacturing, the Make in India program.
That's right.
So there's definitely no one or the other. It's a question of we need both, and both have their own place, and both have their own space in industry.
We always make such a fuss about the budget, and rightly so. This decides the fate of over 1 billion Indians and industry and job creation and all of that. But do you believe this year around and this session around, it's the budget session that assumes a lot more importance than the budget itself? Because there is going to be the GST where fate has to be decided, there is going to be the bankruptcy code, the real estate regulator bill. I mean, 3 sessions have gone and we haven't really transacted much business.
I mean, it's hard to say which one is important. I mean, budget is important because, if the session doesn't function, I mean, life will go on, but because we've all got used to it. But if the budget doesn't get done, then I think then there's a serious trouble at hand. So I would say that's very important. But having said that, I think it's high time that we get, we are somewhere. I think we have to draw a line as a nation between, political capital versus what's good for a country of 1.2 billion people. And I think whilst we all say this in a laughing manner, we all expect it. I think politicians also has become a part of their life. But I think somewhere there has to be, because there will be a massive reaction to this at some stage. And therefore, I do hope that the session goes on and some of these bills are taken up. Whether they happen or they are defeated is a separate issue, but at least they are taken up.
Do you keep hopes alive for the GST to sail through the budget session?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Not in the budget session.
That's a very crisp and rather pragmatic answer. Not in the budget session. When do you see the GST become a reality?
I would bet hopefully 5-6 months from now.
5-6 months from now. Are you someone who's optimistic, or are you beginning to lose hope in the legislative
No,
agenda
I'm not
altogether?
losing hope at all. I think it will happen, but it's a matter of time. But I sincerely hope that a collaborative effort is looked at in a much more renewed manner, because ultimately the common man is losing out. If GST comes, which is a very crucial legislation which can help the economy, our estimate is the cost of production will come down by 5-7%.
That's right.
Ease of doing business will go up, the consumer will get the benefit, business activity will improve, which means job creation will happen. It's a cascading impact. So I sincerely hope somehow the leadership of all political parties look at it in an objective way and not in their political agenda only.
So 2 quick last questions to you. The budget this time around, and this budget is obviously very different from the rest because there are headwinds from the global economy, but there are tailwinds that have come in from crude oil prices and soft commodities at large. Is this a budget for India, or is this a budget really for the world? Because you want foreign capital to come in, and every investor worth his salt is going to be watching what Finance Minister Jaitley does on the 29th of February.
Absolutely, this budget is going to be critical for India. Of course, we need to get the growth back. We need to get investments back. We need to get to the rural economy. We need to see the balancing as to how the corporate tax can be brought down effectively with incentives being phased out over a period of time, the point that you talked about.
Yes.
So it's an internal budget, it's an India budget, but the world will watch this budget. So when you talk about fiscal, when you talk about whether we are, so there are major international signals, be it on the taxation side, be it on the macroeconomic management side. We would need to look at those issues very carefully, because this is a signal outside.
Is this budget in some sense going to be the blueprint for emerging market economies to follow?
Obviously we would like a budget which is so good, which is going to be emulated. I mean, there's no doubt about it, that if the budget is so good, the emerging markets are going to emulate it. It's fantastic. But whatever budget, we have, it shouldn't just look at the absolute immediate term. There should also be a vision on the future. So I think, I mean, I expect a budget that should take all that into consideration, and take also into consideration that things have not quite been as was expected, and it will be a well-rounded budget.
Well-rounded budget, things not quite as expected. We hope, hopes have been toned down, and so have expectations. And Finance Minister Jaitley will perhaps live up to some of them on the 29th. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for being with us. Always a pleasure chatting with you. We really have the tallest captains of India Inc. right here on ET Now with their big wish list for Finance Minister Jaitley as he gears up to prepare his second full-year budget on the 29th of February.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.